Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take your stack of sources, the articles, the research, the deep cuts, and forge them into pure, actionable knowledge. Our mission today is a study in magnificent contrasts. We are diving deep into Montana.
Big sky country,
Yeah.
and truly, the sources lay out a place that is just. It's defined by geographical and historical extremes.
Right.
It's a state that really refuses any simple definition. It swings between this profound isolation and intense national importance.
And that is the core contradiction we are chasing. I mean, when you start with the raw data, the scale of the state is just staggering.
It's huge.
It is the fourth largest U.S. state by area, just immense in its physical footprint, but then it's the eighth least populated.
And critically, the third least densely populated.
Exactly. So yes, it's big sky country, but it's also known as the treasure state, and the one I really like, the highly evocative, the last best place.
Our deep dive today is really custom designed for you to move quickly but thoroughly through this vast body of information. We'll extract the key knowledge of how Montana's unique and often brutal geography didn't just contain its history, it dictated it.
It forged
It absolutely forged a social and political landscape unlike any other in the West. We need to, trace those gold veins, follow the water to three oceans, and understand the deep political scars left by a century of boom and bust.
Okay, let's unpack the name Montana, because even that has a layer of historical irony baked right in. It sounds simple, right? It implies mountains.
It does, and the implication is rooted in history. The name comes from the Spanish word montaña, meaning mountain or mountainous country.
Okay.
Early Spanish explorers, when they encountered the entire vast chain of the Rockies, they just referred to the northern part of it as Montaña del Norte.
But here's where it gets really interesting, the historical pushback. When the bill to create the territory was brought before Congress in 1864, the name wasn't universally loved.
Not at all.
Representative Samuel Cox, he strongly objected to the name Montana. He complained it was an outright misnomer.
He argued pretty forcefully that the majority of the proposed territory was, in fact, Great Plains and prairie, not mountains.
He even suggested a Native American name would have been far more accurate than a Spanish import.
Yeah, but despite his logic, the Committee on Territories stuck with Montana, and it was adopted. The irony is still there today.
It is.
I mean, when you consider that the eastern 60% of the state is characterized by this rolling expanse of the northern Great Plains, the name is, maybe, still a geographical generalization.
It hints at that core conflict, doesn't it? The dramatic West versus the vast, arid East.
Exactly.
To understand modern Montana, we absolutely have to start with its foundations. The millennia of indigenous presence, followed by the sudden, violent shifts in economic control.
For thousands of years, this land was home to numerous sovereign nations. Our sources identify the major historic tribes encountered by Euro-American settlers. The Apsaluk, or the Crow Nation, they dominated the fertile south-central area.
Okay.
Then the Cheyenne and Lakota held sway in the southeast, while the Blackfeet, Assiniboine, and Crow Volunteers were in the central and north-central parts.
And in the western valleys, you had the Kootenai and the Salish, who are more commonly known as the Flathead.
Right. And this rich cultural mosaic was immediately complicated by the shifting geopolitical boundaries of a rapidly expanding United States.
And the first claim was the most significant geographically.
Absolutely. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803, it placed most of the land east of the Continental Divide under U.S. sovereignty.
And this vast, unexplored territory was immediately followed up on.
Right away, by the Lewis and Clark expedition from 1804 to 1806, which was really the nation's first true scouting mission into this territory.
The wake of Lewis and Clark was then filled by the fur traders. This was Montana's first extractive industry, right? The economic precursor to the gold and copper booms.
It was, and it was a complex and often bloody period. While some fur trade relations were profitable, there were severe conflicts, particularly with the powerful Blackfeet Confederacy, when American trappers started encroaching on their territory.
Threatening their resources.
Exactly. We see an early European establishment with Fort Raymond, built in Crow Indian country as early as 1807. It only operated for about 4 years, though.
But crucially, beyond the immediate conflicts, this interaction brought devastation.
Yes. Indigenous populations, they lacked immunity, and they were just decimated by diseases like smallpox, introduced by the early traders. This fundamentally altered the demographic and the power balance of the entire region.
And meanwhile, the land west of the divide, that was part of the disputed Oregon country.
Right, encompassing the Columbia River drainage. U.S. control was finally formalized with the Oregon Treaty of 1846. And it was in this western region that the first permanent Euro-American settlement was established in 1841 at St. Mary's, near what is now Stevensville.
But the age of beaver pelts and trading posts, that was violently and very quickly eclipsed by the pursuit of minerals.
Gold.
The trigger was gold, first discovered at Gold Creek in 1852. But the real gold rush, the one that attracted tens of thousands of people and required actual political organization, that kicked off in 1862.
And this initial phase was all about placer mining, so individual miners searching riverbeds. Our sources highlight several major discoveries. Alder Gulch, near present-day Virginia City, was among the richest gold placer diggings ever found.
Wow.
And Last Chance Gulch, another massive strike, quickly became Helena, the current capital.
This was a short-lived, chaotic, and just incredibly lucrative gold boom. Between 1862 and 1876, gold output reached something like $144 million.
A staggering amount for the time.
But the true wealth, the wealth that would define Montana for the next century, that lay deeper. As the placer gold faded, the focus shifted to the harder-to-reach lode deposits of silver, and then, most crucially, copper.
And this is the critical technical and economic transition for you to grasp. Gold was largely extracted through surface-level placer methods. Anyone could do it with a pan.
Right.
Copper, however, required massive, capital-intensive hard rock mining and smelting operations. This transition centralized power and wealth in a huge way.
And that centralization happened in one place.
Butte. It became the center for the world's largest mining operations, fueled by expansive silver and ultimately those massive copper deposits that gave Montana its nickname, the Treasure State.
It's also worth mentioning the Yogos sapphires, mined in the center of the state. They're renowned for their unique cornflower blue color and jewel-grade quality, another unique treasure.
And this explosion of activity and population, it necessitated political action. Montana Territory was established relatively quickly on May 26, 1864, carved primarily from the eastern part of the Idaho Territory.
The administrative structure really followed that boom and bust cycle. The early capital shifted so rapidly.
They did. From Bannock, which briefly housed the government, to Virginia City in 1865, and then finally settling on Helena in 1875.
The territory was moving fast to establish its institutions, reflecting a belief that this sudden wealth was, permanent.
We noted that the Montana Historical Society, founded in Virginia City in 1865, is the oldest historical society west of the Mississippi, excluding Louisiana.
That's a fascinating detail.
That speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the early consciousness Montana had of its own unique, unfolding, and often dramatic history, even as it was being written.
And its impact was already becoming national. I mean, look at Yellowstone.
Right. Expeditions launched directly from Helena in 1869 and 1870 into the upper Yellowstone region.
And the extraordinary detailed reports they brought back of the geysers and all the geothermal features that directly led to the establishment of Yellowstone National Park in 1872.
So Montana played this central early role in preserving that natural wonder for the nation, which really sets up the dichotomy of extraction versus preservation that continues to this day.
It really does.
Now, as settlers and corporations arrived, the conflicts over land and resources, they just escalated. This leads to one of the most turbulent periods of American Western expansion, a period marked by betrayal, warfare, and ultimately the triumph of massive corporate interests.
The displacement of Native American tribes often started with, confusion or maybe intentional deception embedded in the treaties. A key example here is the Hellgate Treaty of 1855, negotiated by Governor Isaac Stevens.
It established boundaries for the Flathead Reservation, for the Salish, Pend d'Oreille, and Kootenai people.
But the sources suggest that confusion over the specific terms, whether it was intentional ambiguity by Stevens or genuine translation issues, it led settlers to believe the valuable, productive Bitterroot Valley was instantly open for settlement.
But the tribal nations disputed those provisions vigorously. They had a very different understanding.
And that dispute, that failure of clear communication, it was long-lasting. The Salish people remained in the Bitterroot Valley until 1891, nearly 4 decades after the treaty.
When they were forcibly relocated to the Flathead Reservation.
And to manage the constant influx of settlers and protect traffic rights, the U.S. Army established posts like Camp Cook in 1866.
This inevitably led to open military conflicts. Montana was the staging ground for massive, famous conflicts. The Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876.
Of course.
The strategic Nez Perce war conflicts, like the Battle of the Big Hole and the Battle of Bear Paw in 1877, where Chief Joseph was finally cornered.
But the violence wasn't limited to just pitched battles. It included an ecological campaign against the Plains tribes. I'm talking about the systematic slaughter of the bison.
The statistics are just horrifying, and they really speak to the strategic nature of this campaign. Experts estimated around 13 million bison roamed Montana in 1870.
13.
And the U.S. Army actively encouraged the slaughter. In 1875, General Philip Sheridan even lobbied Congress, advocating for the systematic destruction of the bison herds, specifically to deprive Native people of their foundational food source, their clothing, and their shelter.
The campaign worked brutally fast. By 1884, commercial hunting had driven the species to the verge of extinction. Only about 325 bison remained in the entire United States.
It destroyed the nomadic economy of the Plains tribes, and while the bison were disappearing, a new industry was rapidly expanding to fill that void: cattle ranching.
This industry has been central to Montana's identity since the 1850s, pioneered by figures like Johnny Grant, who began successfully wintering cattle in the Deer Lodge Valley.
And that legacy is why the Grant Corps Ranch National Historic Site exists today. It's a National Park Service property that functions as a working ranch, preserving the history of the open range.
To support both ranching and the massive mining industry, infrastructure was paramount. This meant railroads.
The Northern Pacific Railroad, the NPR, reached Montana from the west and the east in 1882 and 1883, respectively. It finally connected the state to the national economy.
But the sources reveal the construction was anything but smooth. NPR's expansion sparked intense conflict with Native tribes in the 1870s, which actually contributed to the severe financial instability that triggered the Panic of 1873.
It delayed the railroad's completion for years. The Great Northern Railway, the GNR, later known as the High Line, followed, reaching eastern Montana in 1887.
And the GNR is historically significant because it was the brainchild of James J. Hill.
Right, and it never took a single land subsidy from the government. It relied solely on promoting the land along its route, and later became a major promoter of tourism to what would become Glacier National Park.
So Montana achieved statehood on November 8, 1889. Helena was booming. It boasted more millionaires per capita than any other U.S. city in the 1880s, all thanks to gold and silver.
But this concentration of explosive wealth set the stage for one of the darkest periods in American political history, the War of the Copper Kings.
This is the missing piece of the political puzzle that defines Montana's founding, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
The late 19th and early 20th centuries were just dominated by the battle for corporate control over the copper mines of Butte, and by extension, the entire state legislature.
The main players were Marcus Daly, the founder of the Anaconda Copper Mining Company,
And William A. Clark. It was a decade-long political and journalistic war. Daly represented the Anaconda interests, massive, capital-intensive smelting and mining. Clark, meanwhile, focused on accumulation through political manipulation.
He famously spent exorbitant amounts of money, sometimes literally in cash, to buy legislative seats and influence.
And the sources detail how the struggle for the location of the state capital Daly-backed Anaconda, Clark-backed Helena, became a proxy war for who would control state policy.
Helena won, but the real victor was the Anaconda Copper Mining Company.
No question. Through financial prowess and ruthless acquisition, they established a near monopoly that controlled Montana politics, newspapers, and the economy for nearly three-quarters of a century.
And it fundamentally shaped Montana's early political identity as a place deeply wary of external corporate power, even while being utterly dependent on it.
And this era of wealth concentration quickly transitioned into one of massive demographic dispersal and subsequent collapse, the homesteading crisis.
Yes. The initial Homestead Act of 1862 offered 160 acres. In the fertile Midwest, that was enough, but west of the 100th meridian, where the climate is arid.
160 acres was completely insufficient for non-irrigated dryland farming. It was a disaster waiting to happen.
So the government tried to remedy this, first with the enlarged Homestead Act of 1909, increasing the allowance to 320 acres.
And then the Stock-Raising Homestead Act of 1916, allowing 640 acres.
This combination, plus aggressive and frankly misleading advertising by railroads eager to sell their adjacent land, and the temporary boom in wheat prices during World War I, drew tens of thousands of settlers.
They were known by the derogatory term Honeyakers.
Let's clarify Honeyacre. It's a term for new homesteaders seen as ignorant, ill-prepared greenhorns.
Joseph Kinsey Howard captured the tragedy of the situation perfectly. He said he was the Jode of a half-century ago, swarming into a hostile land. Duped when he started, robbed when he arrived, hopeful, courageous, ambitious, but utterly unsuited to the environment.
Wow.
The core failure was twofold. The settlers, mostly from wetter regions, were completely unprepared for the arid reality of Montana. And critically, they arrived during a temporary period of unusually high precipitation that masked the true aridity of the land.
So they thought they could farm like they did back home.
Exactly. They lacked the necessary deep plowing and water conservation techniques required for dryland farming.
And the bubble burst with devastating force. The drought years between 1917 and 1921 just wiped them out.
This led to massive abandonment of farms, often with families simply leaving their furniture and belongings behind, and the subsequent bankruptcy of nearly half the state's banks due to defaulted farm mortgages.
It was a demographic and economic catastrophe that fundamentally restructured Montana agriculture into the large-scale ranching and dryland grain operations we know today.
And the World War I years also brought about this political extremism, creating a profound contradiction. Immense patriotism paired with deep repression.
And we have to pause here for Jeannette Rankin.
Absolutely. Rankin, a progressive Republican from Missoula, achieved a monumental feat in 1916. She was the first woman ever elected to the U.S. Congress.
But her lasting historical importance is her conscience. She is the only member of Congress to vote against U.S. entry in both World War I in 1917.
And World War II in 1941, the latter being the sole dissenting vote against the declaration of war after Pearl Harbor.
That takes extraordinary political courage.
Especially considering Montana's fervent war support. Montana contributed 25% higher manpower per capita to the armed forces than any other state. But this enthusiasm was paired with a shocking level of wartime hysteria, which historians call Montana's agony.
Montana's agony, and it was codified into law. In February 1918, the state legislature passed the Montana Sedition Act,
which became the model for the federal law later that year. This act made it a crime to utter, print, write, or publish any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about the U.S. government, its flag, or the military.
The consequences were swift and brutal, fueled by anti-immigrant sentiment.
Over 200 people were arrested and 78 were convicted. The vast majority were of German or Austrian descent. This hysteria also targeted labor activists.
The horrific lynching of industrial workers of the World Organizer Frank Little in Butte in August 1917, after his anti-war speeches, sent a clear, chilling message.
And the repression went so far that the state agency prosecuting these cases, the Montana Council of Defense, actively prohibited the public speaking of German, a restriction that shockingly remained in effect into the early 1920s.
It wasn't until 2006 that Governor Brian Schweitzer posthumously issued full pardons for everyone convicted under the Montana Sedition Act.
Finally attempting to reckon with that dark chapter. Montana contributed heavily again during World War II, including the vital work of the Crow Nation Code Talkers. We also note that the 1st Special Service Force, or the famous Devil's Brigade,
a joint U.S.-Canadian commando unit specializing in winter warfare.
They trained at Fort William Henry Harrison, near Helena, preparing for their rugged assignments overseas.
And the state's strategic importance only intensified after 1945, transitioning seamlessly into the Cold War.
Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls became one of the nation's core strategic assets. In 1959, it was selected as the home for the new Minuteman Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Field, the ICBM field.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, why Montana? It has to be because of its geography.
Absolutely. The flat, accessible, yet sparsely populated Great Plains offered the immense space required for dispersed, hardened silos.
Plus, the state's position offered excellent ballistic coverage of potential targets in the Soviet Union.
And this location was not just theoretical. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, President Kennedy reportedly referred to the Minuteman missiles deployed at Malmstrom as his ace in the hole.
His ace in the hole. That underscores Montana's central role in the moment the world came closest to nuclear war.
Today, that legacy continues. Montana hosts the largest ICBM field in the U.S., covering an immense 23,500 square miles.
The contradiction here is profound. A state celebrated globally for its remote, pristine frontier, the last best place, is simultaneously a core strategic pillar of America's nuclear defense apparatus.
To understand the extremes of Montana's history, the boom, the bust, the strategic importance, you absolutely must grasp the extremes of its geography. This landscape is the primary driver of its identity.
Okay, let's unpack this. The Continental Divide is the Great Splitter. It roughly cleaves the state. The western portion is defined by the rugged Rocky Mountains,
while the eastern two-thirds, about 60% of the state, is the vast expanse of the eastern Great Plains.
West of the divide, the mountains are continuous, and just immense. The Bitterroot Mountains, for example, are one of the longest continuous mountain ranges in the entire chain, stretching from Alaska down to Mexico.
Right. They, along with the Cabinet and Coeur d'Alene Mountains, form that rugged barrier with Idaho.
But here's a surprising geographic detail that's often missed. The isolated island ranges found dotted across the eastern Great Plains.
Ranges like the Crazy Mountains, the Little Belt, and the Judith Mountains, they seem to just erupt out of the prairie with no connection to the Rockies.
So what's their origin story?
It's fascinating. They weren't formed by the same tectonic plate collisions that built the Rockies. Instead, these island ranges were formed between 120 and 66 million years ago when magma-molten rock forced its way up from the Earth's interior, cracking and pushing the surface layers upward.
So they're ancient, isolated volcanic remnants.
Exactly, in the middle of a sea of prairie grass, often deeply mineralized.
And while we're talking geology, we should mention the paleontological significance. The Hell Creek Formation in northeast Montana, near the Judith River Basin, is globally famous.
It's a major source of dinosaur fossils, particularly late Cretaceous specimens. Paleontologist Jack Horner brought major attention to the region with his groundbreaking finds at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman.
Now let's pivot to water, because Montana occupies a position that is truly globally unique. This is a powerful piece of actionable knowledge to have about the state.
It really is. Montana is one of the very few places on Earth where rivers flow out to 3 different major watersheds: the Pacific Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and Hudson Bay, which connects to the Arctic drainage.
3 oceans, and this incredible confluence is centered on one specific point.
Triple Divide Peak, located high up in Glacier National Park. If you consider the Hudson Bay drainage as feeding the Arctic Ocean, then Triple Divide Peak is one of the only places on Earth with drainage to 3 different oceans.
Okay, so let's follow those streams. First, the Pacific drainage.
All water west of the Continental Divide flows toward the Pacific via the Clark Fork of the Columbia River, which rises near Butte. The Clark Fork system is considered part of the longest river system in the Rockies.
Next, the Gulf of Mexico drainage, which dominates the state. This is governed by the mighty Missouri River,
which is formed near Three Forks by the confluence of the Jefferson, Madison, and Gallatin rivers. This entire Missouri system eventually flows into the Mississippi River.
which means the total length from Hell Roaring Creek in southern Montana all the way through the Jefferson, Missouri, and Mississippi. That's the longest river system in all of North America.
It's an immense system that drains over half of Montana's land area. But there's a massive contrast here in how that water is managed.
How so?
Nearly 1/3 of the Missouri River within Montana is contained behind 10 major dams, fundamentally altering its flow.
Okay.
In stark contrast, the Yellowstone River, another major tributary, is the longest undammed, free-flowing river in the entire contiguous United States.
Wow.
It drains about 1/4 of Montana's landscape.
And finally, the third watershed, heading north.
The Northern Divide crosses Glacier National Park. At Triple Divide Peak, water from the Waterton, Belly, and St. Mary rivers flows north into Alberta, where they join the Saskatchewan River system and ultimately pour into Hudson Bay.
And for a fun local fact, to punctuate the sheer volume of water.
Montana claims the disputed title of possessing the world's shortest river, the Roe River, just outside Great Falls. It's a testament to how complex and water-rich the western portion is.
Now let's get into the climate, because the history of homesteading and the development of the missile field were utterly dependent on this volatile factor. Extreme barely covers the massive swings the state experiences.
The variation is driven by topography and latitude, spanning 4 degrees of latitude and massive altitude changes. The Continental Divide acts like a dam, restricting warmer Pacific air from moving east and drier continental air from moving west.
So the state gets slammed by both maritime and continental weather systems.
Exactly. We have to detail the Loma incident of 1972 because it holds the U.S. record for the most extreme 24-hour temperature change.
This story is wild.
On January 15th, the temperature at Loma shot up from a bone-chilling -54 degrees Fahr to 49 degrees Fahrenheit.
That is an almost unbelievable 103 degrees Fahr difference in one single day.
It is. And that extreme swing is the signature of the Chinook winds. Let's explain the mechanics here.
Please do.
A Chinook wind occurs when moist air from the Pacific is forced up the western slope of the mountains, dropping its moisture as snow or rain. This is known as adiabatic cooling.
Okay.
Once it crests the mountain, the air descends the eastern slope, rapidly compressing and warming. That's adiabatic heating.
And when this dry, warm wind hits the plains, it can raise temperatures by 50 or 60 degrees Fahrenheit in just a matter of hours.
leading to conditions like the Loma incident. These winds are common just east of the mountains.
But when the Chinook isn't blowing,
The vast continental cold sets in, bringing air straight down from the Arctic. Montana holds the undisputed record for the coldest temperature in the contiguous U.S. A staggering -70 degrees Africard recorded near Rogers Pass in 1954.
-70. And the same topography creates a dramatic range shadow effect that dictated who survived the homesteading crisis and where the cattle operations thrived.
Yes, the mountain ranges block most moist Pacific air, creating high precipitation in the West Heron near the Idaho border gets almost 35 inches annually.
Meanwhile, eastern valleys lying in the mountain shadow, like Deer Lodge, are significantly drier, receiving only about 11 inches.
So you transition from dense forests in the west to arid steppe and prairie in the east, all within a few hundred miles.
So what do these extremes mean for the future? Climate change implications are already significant, and Montana is feeling them disproportionately.
The sources indicate that Montana's average temperature is rising faster than the continental U.S. average. The most visible impact is in Glacier National Park, where the sources note the iconic glaciers are predicted to melt away completely within the next few decades.
Which will change the park's identity forever.
And, ironically, those warming winters are causing enormous environmental damage. Historically, extreme cold spells killed off bark beetles, keeping their populations in check.
But now that the winters are consistently milder, the beetles are proliferating unchecked.
They're launching massive, widespread attacks on the pine and fir forests of western Montana.
And this insect infestation means millions of dead, dry trees, which directly translates to a substantial increase in the severity and area burned by forest fires.
So the climate extremes are not just historical footnotes. They are actively shaping modern land management and the future of the state's natural resources.
Let's shift our focus to the people and the unique policies that govern Montana. The population is small, just over 1 million residents, but its social and legal structure contains some profound national anomalies that really define the state.
Demographically, Montana has a highly unique mix. It has one of the highest percentages of Native Americans in the U.S., 6.5%, ranking 6th nationally.
And the sources detail 7 major reservations encompassing 11 federally recognized tribal nations, with the 12th, the Little Shell Tribe of Chippewa Indians, recently receiving federal recognition in 2019.
What's crucial for you to understand is the political commitment to this heritage. Montana is the only state in the U.S. with a constitutional mandate requiring education to actively recognize and preserve the distinct and unique cultural heritage of the American Indians.
That's incredible.
This mandate is enshrined in the state's expansive 1972 Constitution and implemented through the Indian Education for All Act of 1999.
And it requires that all public schools, from preschool through higher education, integrate American Indian history and culture into their curricula.
It's an active state-level legal mechanism to ensure cultural integrity is maintained and recognized by the entire populace, not just tribal members.
Beyond Native American communities, Montana's European ancestry tells a story of immigration dictated by geography and industry. German ancestry is dominant overall,
reflecting the influx of farmers drawn by the promise of the Great Plains. But you find strong pockets of Scandinavian, especially Norwegian, ancestry dominating the farming-dominated northern and eastern prairies.
And in the western mining cities, particularly Butte, the mix reflects global mining migration, including huge numbers of Irish, Cornish, and Finnish communities.
Our sources even mentioned a small, historic Chinatown in Helena, showing how the gold rush made Montana a global nexus.
Moving to economics and policy, let's address the financial anomaly that is constantly discussed by outsiders.
Montana has no statewide sales tax.
It's one of only 5 states in the country without one, which makes it an extremely attractive place for consumers, but presents an immediate fiscal challenge for the government.
And that lack of a statewide sales tax creates a massive problem for infrastructure funding. How do you maintain state infrastructure, roads, parks, public safety, when you have an annual influx of roughly 12.2 million non-residents using these services?
Who contribute nothing to the tax base.
Exactly. The state found a unique, localized solution: the resort tax. The Montana legislature passed a law in 1985 allowing smaller, high-traffic tourist communities to levy a local sales tax.
So places like Big Sky, Whitefish, or Red Lodge.
Right, and this local tax is applied specifically to lodging, food service, alcohol, and certain retail luxuries. It's absolutely vital because the small resident tax base of just over 1 million people is entirely disproportionate to the massive infrastructure costs created by those 12 million annual non-residents.
It's a policy designed to make the tourists pay for the roads they drive on and the services they use.
The core economy itself is a mixture of history and modern adaptation, heavily reliant on agriculture, resource extraction, and that rapidly growing tourism sector.
And here's a fun fact that reflects the culture. Montana ranks second nationally in craft breweries per capita.
The legal framework has also undergone dramatic shifts. Montana's original 1889 Constitution was largely restrictive, designed to limit the power of state government and, perhaps more tellingly, limit the taxation of the powerful mining and railroad corporations.
That changed fundamentally with the popular adoption of the expansive 1972 Constitution.
The sources emphasize that this document created a much more balanced power structure, elevating the executive and legislative branches to parity. And crucially, it introduced a much more progressive and expansive list of civil and political rights, even extending specific protections and rights to children for the first time.
Montana also has a fascinating, specialized judicial branch structure designed to deal with its unique economic and geographical realities.
Yes, alongside the Supreme Court and district courts, they have highly focused bodies reporting directly to the Supreme Court. The two most notable are the Montana Workers' Compensation Court,
which handles all workers' claims stemming from the state's hazardous resource industries,
and the unique Montana Water Court.
The water court is absolutely essential in a state defined by water rates.
Its sole function is to adjudicate, or formally settle, all historical water rights claims across the state's 4 major river basins. In a state where water is life, that court holds immense power, deciding the prioritization of every claim from ranching to mining to municipal use.
Politically, Montana has historically been defined by split-ticket voting,
reflecting a deep ideological divide between the progressive, unionized, high-density mining communities in the West and the conservative, sparsely populated agricultural East.
The common wisdom used to be send the liberals to Washington and the conservatives to Eleanor.
But that pattern has shifted markedly in the last decade. The consolidation of Republican control has been pronounced. Following the most recent electoral cycles, the sources note that by early 2025, Montana had no Democratic statewide office holders left.
And finally, a very contemporary policy nugget that shows Montana is still willing to make unique, headline-grabbing decisions.
In 2023, the state became the first U.S. state to ban the social media app TikTok and the online marketplace Temu, citing national security concerns related to data access.
Regarding quality of life, Montana presents yet another set of intense contradictions. On one hand, physical health is excellent. It is ranked as the least obese state in the U.S. at 19.6%.
On the other hand, it grapples with a severe and persistent mental health challenge. Montana has the second highest suicide rate in the U.S. at 26.6 per 100,000 residents, only behind Alaska.
And this high rate is sadly common in sparsely populated states. Factors often cited include profound isolation, lack of accessible mental health services,
the economic hardship tied to the boom and bust cycles, and a culture of stoicism that discourages seeking help.
The health infrastructure is slowly adapting to serve this huge geographical area.
Yes, Billings has 2 designated trauma eye hospitals, the highest level of trauma care available, making it a critical medical hub for not only Montana, but also much of neighboring northern Wyoming.
When we talk about the Big Sky lifestyle, we're talking about an entire culture built around fierce independence and an intense connection to the landscape. This cultural preservation was driven, in part, by artists who felt compelled to document a disappearing way of life.
The quintessential Montana artist is Charles Marion Russell, universally known as the cowboy artist. He lived the life he painted, creating over 2,000 paintings and sculptures that vividly depict the fading frontier.
The cowboys, the Native American tribes, the landscapes of Montana and Alberta.
His work is just invaluable for understanding the transition from open range to settled agriculture.
Another key figure is Evelyn Cameron, a naturalist and photographer who settled in Terry in the Eastern Prairie. She documented early 20th century life with startling clarity,
capturing not just the beautiful landscape, but the daily grind of cowboys, sheepherders, and homesteaders facing the arid reality of the land.
And on the literary side, we have Wallace Earl Stegner, born in Great Falls, who is often cited as the dean of Western writers.
His work grappled with the complex relationship between humans and the harsh Western landscape. Also, James Willard Schultz, or Apicuni, who lived extensively among the Blackfeet, and is noted for his prolific and detailed stories about their life.
And this cultural appreciation for the landscape ties directly into the massive outdoor recreation economy. Our sources show that a staggering 35% of the state's land, 31.3 million acres, is managed by federal and state agencies.
Encompassing huge portions of Glacier and Yellowstone national parks. The state is literally defined by its public land.
And that public land draws the world. The fishing alone is globally famous.
Oh yeah, Montana has been a premier destination for world-class trout fisheries since the 1930s.
But the popularity of fly fishing just exploded nationally after the 1992 film A River Runs Through It.
Based on Norma McLean's novel, filmed in the state, specifically highlighting the pristine nature of its rivers.
And that popularity translates directly into immense economic impact. Non-residents generated nearly $5 billion in economic output in a single recent year, with over $1.3 billion of that generated just by visitors participating in guided fishing experiences.
The Big Sky lifestyle is a major economic engine.
Beyond fishing, winter sports thrive. Montana boasts 15 developed downhill ski areas, including major destination resorts like Big Sky,
Which is one of the largest in North America, and Whitefish Mountain Resort. And for the vast eastern portion of the state, there are over 4,000 miles of maintained snowmobile trails.
But for a truly unique expression of Montana culture and sport, you have to look at equestrian ski joring.
This is a thrilling, timed event where a skier is pulled at high speed by a horse and rider through a course, navigating gates and jumps.
It perfectly captures the state's cultural fusion of ranching, skiing, and rugged individualism.
Whitefish hosts the World Ski Joring Championships as part of its annual Winter Carnival, bringing together the Old West and the winter athlete.
A few final historical nuggets in the sporting world.
In 1889, Spokane became Montana's only Kentucky Derby winner, connecting the state to the national equestrian scene.
And in a surprising testament to early women's sports, the Fort Shaw Native American women's basketball team won the world championship title at the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis.
Playing undefeated in their previous season against college and military teams, they demonstrated extraordinary athleticism on a global stage before women's organized sports were widely accepted.
And in modern times, Montana has produced Olympic champions like skier Tommy Moe.
The first American skier to win 2 medals at a single Winter Olympics, gold and silver in 1994, and Eric Bergust, who won gold in freestyle aerial skiing in 1998. It's a legacy forged by the snow and the mountains.
It's a legacy of fierce independence, stark survival, and a profound connection to the immense dramatic landscape.
This deep dive into Montana has revealed a state perpetually defined by its geographical and historical extremes. We've examined a land split by the Continental Divide whose rivers flow to 3 different oceans, and a place that simultaneously holds the record for the contiguous U.S.'s lowest temperature and the most extreme 24-hour temperature swing.
Its history mirrors that extremity, swinging from the chaotic, politically corrupt boom of the Copper Kings through the crushing bust of the Hunyaker homesteading crisis and into periods of immense political repression epitomized by the Montana Sedition Act.
Yet it also possesses unique policy achievements, like the Montana Water Court and the unprecedented constitutional mandate for Native American education.
So Montana exists in a state of cognitive dissonance. It is celebrated as the last best place, a sanctuary of untouched nature and public land, and a protector of cultural integrity through Indian education for all.
But that same open, vast space simultaneously hosts the largest intercontinental ballistic missile field in the U.S. at Malmstrom Air Force Base, a core strategic asset for national security.
It's a state grappling with the economic and infrastructural pressures of massive, ongoing tourism and the sociological strain implied by its high rates of despair in sparsely populated areas.
So we leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over. For a place defined by its open spaces and its moniker, the last best place, what does it truly mean to be both a remote, untouched American frontier and a fundamental core strategic asset in the nation's defense apparatus?
The deep dive suggests that the preservation of that remote frontier might, ironically, be the very reason it was selected as the staging ground for America's nuclear deterrence. The two Montanas are perhaps closer than anyone imagined.